It's 2 a.m. and you're lying in bed wide awake, but you're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not replaying your day. You're in the middle of an argument that hasn't happened with a person who hasn't said anything about a situation that doesn't exist, and you're winning, or losing, or dramatically walking away. The script keeps changing, but the feeling stays the same. This feels real. You've practiced the conversation 17 different ways. You've prepared your comeback. You've imagined their reaction. You've even planned what you'll say after they apologize. And none of it has happened. None of it will happen. But your body doesn't know that. Your heart is racing. Your jaw is clenched. You're angry at someone for something they did in your imagination. If you're someone who constantly creates fake scenarios in your head, who rehearses conversations that never occur, who lives through problems that don't exist, this isn't random. This isn't just daydreaming. This is your brain trying to protect you from something. And once you understand what, everything starts to make sense. Let me describe something you've probably done 1,000 times. Someone texts you, "We need to talk." And immediately your brain starts spinning. What did I do? Are they mad? Are they breaking up with me? Are they firing me? Did I say something wrong? Within 30 seconds, you've created 15 different versions of that conversation. You've imagined their tone, their words, your response. You've built an entire narrative around 4 words that could mean absolutely nothing. And by the time the actual conversation happens, you're already emotionally exhausted. Because you've lived through it multiple times in your head, and none of those versions were real. This is what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety. Your brain is trying to prepare for every possible outcome so nothing can catch you off guard. But instead of feeling prepared, you feel drained. Because you're not just thinking about the future, you're emotionally experiencing it over and over, in every possible variation, until the real moment arrives and it never matches any of the scenarios you created. Here's what's actually happening in your brain. When you create fake scenarios, your amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. As far as your nervous system is concerned, that argument you're having in your head is actually happening. So your body responds accordingly. Your heart rate increases, your cortisol levels spike, your muscles tense, you're in fight or flight mode over something that exists only in your mind. Neuroscientists call this simulation theory. Your brain is constantly running simulations of possible futures to help you prepare for threats. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. Our ancestors who could imagine the lion before it appeared had a better chance of surviving. But in modern life, the threats aren't lions. They're social rejection, conflict, failure, embarrassment. And your brain is still running the same program, trying to predict and prepare for every possible version of these threats. The problem is, it never stops. Because unlike a lion, which either attacks or doesn't, social situations have infinite variations. So your brain keeps simulating and simulating and simulating until you're trapped in a loop of scenarios that will never happen. But there's something deeper here, something most people don't realize. Creating fake scenarios isn't just about anxiety, it's about control. Think about it. In your head, you control everything. You control what people say. You control how they react. You control the outcome. You get to win the argument, deliver the perfect comeback, make them see your point, make them apologize, make them understand. In real life, you control none of that. Real conversations are unpredictable. People say things you didn't expect. They react in ways you can't anticipate. They don't follow your script. And if you're someone who grew up in an environment where things felt chaotic, unpredictable, or emotionally unsafe, creating scenarios in your head becomes a way to regain control, even if that control is an illusion. Psychologists link this behavior to something called maladaptive daydreaming, though not everyone who creates scenarios has the full disorder. It exists on a spectrum, and many people use mental rehearsal as a coping mechanism for deeper anxiety. Let me take you back to childhood. Maybe you grew up walking on eggshells, never knowing what mood your parent would be in, never knowing if you'd get praised or punished for the same behavior. So you learned to prepare, to anticipate, to run through every possible version of an interaction before it happened. Because if you could predict their reaction, maybe you could protect yourself. Maybe you could avoid the pain. Maybe you could finally feel safe, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you grew up emotionally neglected, and the only place you felt understood, seen, or validated was in your imagination, where you could create the conversations you wished you were having, the apologies you wished you'd received, the connection you desperately needed. Either way, your brain learned that mental rehearsal equals safety, and now as an adult you can't turn it off, even when the threat isn't real, even when the situation is neutral. Your brain is still trying to protect you from a danger that no longer exists. But here's where it gets really painful. The scenarios you create aren't random, they follow patterns, and those patterns reveal your deepest fears. If you're constantly imagining arguments, you probably fear conflict. If you're always rehearsing breakups, you probably fear abandonment. If you're preparing for rejection, you probably believe deep down that you're unworthy of being chosen. Your fake scenarios are showing you what you're most afraid of. They're not predictions, they're projections. Your brain is taking your unresolved trauma, your core wounds, your deepest insecurities, and playing them out in endless variations. And the cruelest part, by rehearsing these worst-case scenarios over and over, you're actually training your brain to expect them. You're reinforcing the neural pathways that say, this is what always happens. People always leave. Conversations always go wrong. I always mess it up. Until those beliefs become so automatic, so ingrained, that you start seeing evidence for them everywhere, even when it's not there. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once your brain believes something, it looks for proof, and it will find it, even if it has to distort reality to do so. This is why people who create fake scenarios often experience a strange phenomenon. The thing they imagine sometimes does happen, not because they predicted the future, but because they unconsciously created it. You imagine someone being distant, so you act guarded, which makes them pull back, which confirms your fear, which makes you create more scenarios about them leaving, which makes you act even more distant. Until the relationship you were trying to protect collapses under the weight of scenarios that never needed to happen. This is called a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's one of the most devastating consequences of living in your head instead of in reality. But let's talk about the other side of this, because it's not all negative. People who create fake scenarios also tend to be incredibly creative, highly empathetic, deeply introspective. You have an extraordinary ability to imagine multiple perspectives, to consider different outcomes, to think several steps ahead. In the right context, this is a superpower. Writers, artists, strategists, therapists, they all use this same mental process. The difference is they direct it, they use it intentionally, they don't let it run on autopilot. The problem isn't that you create scenarios, the problem is that you can't stop, that the scenarios control you instead of you controlling them, that they drain your energy, distort your perception, and keep you trapped in a future that doesn't exist. So how do you break the cycle? First, you have to recognize when you're in it. The moment you notice you're creating a scenario, pause. Don't judge it. Don't try to stop it. Just notice it. Name it. I'm doing it again. I'm creating a scenario. That awareness alone interrupts the loop. because as long as the scenario feels real, your brain will keep running it. But the moment you recognize it as a mental simulation, it loses some of its power. Second, ask yourself, what am I trying to control? What am I trying to prevent? What fear is this scenario protecting me from? Because every fake scenario is trying to solve a problem. Maybe it's trying to prepare you. Maybe it's trying to give you closure you never got. Maybe it's trying to protect you from being caught off guard. Whatever it is, name it. Bring it into consciousness. Because unconscious fears run the show. Conscious fears can be addressed. Third, reality test the scenario. I ask yourself, is this based on evidence or is this based on fear? Has this person actually done anything to suggest this will happen, or am I projecting past pain onto a present situation? Most of the time, you'll realize the scenario has no basis in current reality. It's an echo of an old wound, and recognizing that helps your nervous system calm down. Fourth, and this is the hardest part, you have to learn to tolerate uncertainty, because the reason you create scenarios is because not knowing feels unbearable. Your brain would rather imagine the worst-case scenario than sit with the discomfort of, I don't know what will happen. But life is uncertain, people are unpredictable, outcomes are unknowable, and no amount of mental rehearsal will change that. The only way forward is to practice sitting with the unknown, to let the future be a question mark, to trust that you'll be able to handle whatever comes without needing to rehearse it first. And slowly, with practice, the scenarios will lose their grip. Not because they disappear completely, but because you stop believing them. You stop treating them as real. You stop letting them dictate your emotions, your actions, your life. Here's what I need you to understand. If you create fake scenarios in your head, you're not broken. You're not overthinking for no reason. You're not being irrational. You're a person with a highly active imagination and a nervous system that's trying to protect you from pain. The scenarios aren't the enemy. They're a symptom of unresolved fear, of past trauma, of a brain that learned early that the world is unpredictable and dangerous. But you're not that powerless child anymore. You don't need to rehearse every conversation to feel safe. You don't need to control every outcome to survive. You can let the future be unknown. You can let people surprise you. You can let conversations unfold naturally without a script. And when you do, you'll discover something incredible. Reality is actually less painful than the scenarios you've been creating, because in reality, people are complex, conversations are nuanced, outcomes are rarely as extreme as you imagined. The worst-case scenario you've been preparing for. It almost never happens, and when something difficult does happen, you handle it. Not because you rehearsed it, but because you're capable, because you're resilient, because you're stronger than you think. So the next time you find yourself at 2 a.m., are in the middle of an argument that doesn't exist with a person who hasn't said anything about a situation that will never happen, pause. Take a breath. Remind yourself, this is not real. This is my brain trying to protect me, but I don't need this protection anymore. And then gently let it go. Not because you've solved it, not because you've prepared for every outcome, but because you trust that whatever happens, you'll figure it out in the moment, with the real person, in the real situation. You don't need to live in your head anymore. Reality is waiting for you, and it's not as scary as you think.